Hello, friends. In one of my old videos, which is called How to Be Happy, 3 main rules for happiness. One of the rules was to accept the simple fact that absolute justice does not exist in nature, that justice is always relative. In any case, justice for everyone cannot be achieved at a specific moment in time. This statement seemed controversial to many, because at first glance, well, what nonsense. I want to disagree with this. Of course, justice exists and we encounter it all the time. Justice often triumphs, we have been taught this all our lives. But is this really so? Friends, I will try to return to this topic once again and reason a little. Justice as a concept and a certain goal, of course, exists, but, as a rule, only at the end of any story, at the end of life, as the crown of natural balance. In this sense, the world is both fair and unfair at the same time. At a specific moment in time, any statement about justice is just a subjective value judgment. The point of view of one person or a group of people in relation to others. I have already given an example of competition in the wild. A hare and a wolf that caught up with him and ate him. From the hare's point of view, a blatant injustice occurred, he lost his life, but from the wolf's point of view, everything happened quite fairly, he got his fill, fed his wolf cubs. In the wild, living beings compete for resources. We must not forget that man and our species is called Homo sapiens is also a part of nature. Why is it so important to remember this? When we forget that man is a part of nature, that man is essentially one species among other animals, then we are overcome by vanity, we begin to live without regard for nature, for ecology, we exploit and treat plants, other animals, microorganisms with disdain, we pollute and destroy each other. It seems to us that we are exalting ourselves, but in fact, by denying biology in ourselves, we only become filled with vanity and narcissism. Any wars, man-made disasters and bloodsheds are the result of this artificial, imposed exaltation of man over nature, isolation from earthly realities, man's fascination with his own chosenness. So, is this world fair? Of course not. You may object, but there are phenomena that, at first glance, are 100% fair. For example, the fact that right now each of us is sitting in our warm, cozy home, well-fed and happy, that is certainly fair. This is, of course, true. But only from your point of view. There are other people, other creatures who will consider something completely different to be fair. In order to warm, heat your home right now, to feed you, many animals have suffered and will suffer. Many of them were even killed, died from the consequences of man-made development, pollution, including to give you such an opportunity, to sit and enjoy life now. If you ate a chicken and think it was fair, then don't forget that you forgot to ask the chicken itself about fairness. And that means there is no ideal, no absolute opinion on this issue. To make clothes, furniture, and household items for you, they had to cut down trees, some plants, pollute the atmosphere, and at least thousands of animals and billions of microorganisms, the simplest forms of life, died. Is the fact that they don't have a brain as developed as yours, Homo sapiens, fair in itself or not? I don't want to instill in you a sense of guilt for eating a chicken. This example simply shows that there is no absolute justice that is the same for all living beings around us. Even what seems unequivocally fair to us is, in fact, only fair for a limited number of subjects, and there is no absolute justice in nature. Is it fair that some people get sick and die before they even reach old age, while others have more advanced genetics and a stronger immune system? From the point of view of the highest natural justice, it is certainly fair, as is death itself, as such, but during life, at a specific moment in time, it is impossible to achieve this same justice for everyone. Some are born sick, others healthy, some rich, others poor. Someone was lucky to be born into a professor's family, and someone into a shepherd's family, a simple worker, or even a beggar. Someone was born in well-fed and rich Switzerland, and someone in northern Sudan. And all these people initially do not have any fair distribution of opportunities. Or take and consider any example from medicine. A child is born with a severe congenital malformation, say, incomplete development of the bladder, with a pathology that was not detected on ultrasound before birth. When, even after successful operations, with a high degree of probability, such a child will remain disabled for the rest of his life. Tell me, is this fair or not? Who is to blame for this, and is it worth looking for someone's fault at all? Some people, usually those who are passionate about religion, like to explain this, for example, by the fact that a child pays for the sins of his ancestors. But, excuse me, what sins? An innocent child. And why is this considered fair? After all, a person should not suffer and pay for the sins of some unknown people who lived long before he was born. Or an example of any serious infectious disease, for example, COVID-19. Remember, it was not so long ago. One person was lucky, he had an asymptomatic or mild form of the disease and survived, since he had a stronger immune system. And another, for example, your friend or relative, died of pneumonia and other severe complications after prolonged suffering in the intensive care unit. Think about it, is there any justice in this at all? Of course not. Because justice does not exist in nature and cannot exist. Many people are very inclined to talk about justice, but often this is just empty shaking of air, demagogy, throwing dust in the eyes, since any reasonable person understands that it is impossible to achieve justice for everyone. This simply contradicts human nature and nature itself as such. The craving for justice is just a kind of side effect of our psyche, a sign of the development of our brain and mental processes. The great thinkers of antiquity, Tommaso Campanella and Thomas More, as well as many of their followers, have always tried and continue to try to create a kind of city of the sun, a society of perfection and prosperity, where everyone will take care of each other, putting their interests below public ones, but biology and human nature always interfere with the implementation of these utopian ideas in practice. In practice, nothing has yet been implemented except for capitalism, hated by many. The fact that for any person the state when one's own shirt is closer to the body is natural is a given in nature, and it is very easy to prove this given. A simple everyday example. Friends, imagine that you are listening to the news on TV or radio, reading the news feed, and they report that somewhere an airliner with several hundred innocent passengers on board, many of whom were children, has crashed. What do you feel at that moment? A normal person usually feels a feeling of deep bitterness and sympathy. It is painful to even imagine how these innocent people, children, and old people died. Perhaps this news will cause you grief for several hours after watching this TV show, reading this news. Or even throughout the day you will lose the desire to have fun and continue your daily activities. But the next day you will gradually forget about this news, someone will forget it after a few hours, and your life will continue as before. Now imagine for a moment that your loved ones and relatives were passengers on that plane, your children, or your mom and dad. Will you be able to forget this event in just a few hours? Most likely, you will remember this tragic day for the rest of your life. And this example wonderfully shows that for a person, the private will always be objectively more important than the public. Your personal interests are more important than the public. Your shirt will always be closer to your body. This is simply a given of nature, it is stupid to argue with it. It is unpleasant to realize this, especially for people with a mythological or religious worldview, but it is so. Your indignation at these words about the lack of justice is quite understandable and even justified in a sense. After all, it is very difficult for a person to admit the presence of a biological natural component, since throughout the history of mankind we have strived for high moral ideals, tried with all our might to forget, sweep under the carpet our animal origin. But ask yourself, to which doctor will you go for treatment yourself, entrust your priceless health? To someone who studied biology well at school and knows that Homo sapiens belongs to the order Primates, the family Hominidae, the class Mammalia, the type Chordates and the kingdom Animals? Or would you prefer to be treated by a shaman, a failing doctor who did not study biology at school and denies, for example, anatomy, physiology and other sciences, ignored everything scientific and lived in self-deception? In general, it is unclear how such a doctor passed the exams and entered a medical university, passed all the stages of certification, if he does not know the simple truths in the basic science, biology. The answer is obvious. Such doctors who do not agree to consider humans as animals should, in theory, be stripped of their diplomas and sent to retake the biology exam at school. Friends, justice in the absolute sense does not exist and never existed in nature. It is always relative, and absolute natural justice will come, I repeat, only at the end of any story, more often at the end of a person's life. That is, on the one hand, the world is unfair, but on the other hand if you look at phenomena and events detachedly, impartially, then on the contrary, it is fair. The wolf will die someday, his body will become a nutrient medium for microorganisms, reducers. Producers and consumers will begin their work. New, young grass will grow, which will be eaten by those same hares, or the descendants of those hares, which the wolf loved to feast on during his life. Justice will always prevail, but you must be patient and wait for it. Wait it out and endure. Once I felt some resentment that an elderly boss, a group of elderly people, because of their excessive conservatism, did not trust me with the work that I was ready for and which seemed progressive to me. At that moment of resentment and anger, a sense of injustice, I remembered the wise words of my colleague, who said, "You just need to outlive them all. Just outlive. Be patient." So I did, and soon everything I wanted was achieved. If the feeling of resentment, injustice towards you clouds your mind and you want to take revenge, punish the offender, then sometimes it is useful to just wait it out. Just outlive your offender. There is a special Eastern wisdom in this: do not react with aggression, but learn to wait until the body of your enemy floats past. A sense of injustice often gives rise to an unfounded feeling of envy, that is, suffering about the success of another person. It seems unfair to us that a janitor, getting up at 5 to 6 o'clock in the morning to clean snow, works much more and intensively than an office worker. A janitor's work is physical and much longer than, for example, a computer technology specialist who sleeps until 9 to 10 o'clock in the morning, drinks coffee and works intensively in front of a computer for 3 to 4 hours a day at most, while receiving a reward tens or hundreds of times greater than a simple worker. But, friends, who told you that a single justice exists in nature at all? In nature, there is competition, there is an irresistible desire of any living creature to get what it wants through the least effort and expense. For example, we will take a group of chimpanzees and begin to carefully observe them. After some time of observation, we will notice that more successful representatives will appear in the group, who not only have greater physical strength than the rest, but also those who have learned something that the rest do not know how to do. For example, crack nuts with a stone. Those chimpanzees who turned out to be more cunning, who spied on how the smartest individuals do it with a stone and began to copy, will also be successful. Those who simply stole ready-peeled nuts, that is, essentially swindlers, also did not remain hungry. Those who gained the trust of individuals who know how to crack nuts with a stone. That is, for example, a female who was the first to decide to mate with such a male chimpanzee who learned to crack nuts, will also not remain hungry, since for her warm embrace and willingness to mate, the male will generously reward her, treat her with nut kernels. Thus, only those stubborn monkeys who persistently try to crack nuts, for example, with a stick, and not a stone, will remain hungry. They will mistakenly choose the wrong tool, since a stick, although it seems convenient at first glance, is not well suited for cracking nuts. The wood is too soft. And the monkey that steals or simply spies and copies someone else's experience, it will survive and be successful. Flexibility, the ability to do anything for the sake of profit, is encouraged in nature. And of course, the injustice that seems to all of us, when some conditional oligarch, a rich person, has capital that is millions and billions of times greater than the income of an ordinary worker, is further proof that there is no justice in nature at a given moment in time and never has been. The highest justice, I repeat, is possible only at the end of any story. All living beings are destined to die, and the highest biological justice lies rather in the plane of philosophy. If you are fixated on fighting injustice, then you will be eternally dissatisfied with other people and the world as a whole. This is a destructive position, self-destruction, even from the point of view of psychology. If you constantly judge, criticize, express dissatisfaction, then other people will behave in the same way towards you. You know those people who constantly mumble day after day, "Oh, what a bad country, what a bad government." At the same time, these people themselves often do not even try to improve the world around them, since all their energy goes to criticism and emotions. Emotions are a very event that requires a lot of energy and strength. Note that a person fighting for justice, as he understands it, is usually very harsh on other people, but he is strict with himself. Without noticing it, he demands perfection from the world, from people, and from himself as well. But this is a completely inhuman position. There are no perfect people, and to demand perfection from yourself and others is simply to be cruel to yourself and others. A person with a heightened sense of justice turns himself into a real sufferer. He sees the world in black and white, always exposes everyone, brings them to light, and only makes enemies for himself. An interesting paradox arises: a person fights for justice, for the good of others, so that the world becomes a better place, but in doing so he creates a trap for himself, increasingly unbearable living conditions. To become an eternal fighter for justice often means to turn into an irritated, embittered, bilious person. The life of a rebel, a fighter for justice, a revolutionary, is always full of hardships and suffering. On the other hand, without suffering, of course, it is impossible to achieve the necessary progress. Friends, don't get me wrong, I am in no way calling on anyone to go with the flow or to strive for local justice in certain everyday affairs, on the contrary. The desire for justice is a natural need of our developed brain and an active desire to improve life. This is, of course, a useful benefit and leads to progress, to development. But serving other people, one's cause, this is the active implementation of the principles of justice, formulated by humanity over many years. But, of course, moderation is necessary in everything. As the French philosopher, writer Albert Camus said, I will quote him, "A long struggle for justice absorbs the love that gave birth to it." These are my thoughts, friends. I hope you will think about everything that has been said. When you have another trouble in life, you will not now fall into despair or aggressively attack other people. By the way, aggression is typical of animals. Just remember this video, remember the wise thought that there is no single justice for everyone in nature, which means you need to analyze your mistakes and, having avoided them in the future, move forward. The world does not revolve around us, we are not the center of the earth. Love, philanthropy, careful attitude to nature, this is the true benefactor, and not the fight for justice, and especially not empty talk about this very justice. I say goodbye to you. I urge you to steadfastly endure all the hardships of life, as did, for example, Forrest Gump, a very wise man even though according to the plot of the film he was feeble-minded. In the movie Forrest said a brilliant phrase, "Sometimes shit happens." Indeed, shit happens. Sometimes. There is no one-time absolute justice, and our happiness and our future depend only on our work and attitude to troubles. Subscribe to this channel. Thank you for your attention and goodbye.